interested in or paying attention to this project of mine is also a baseball fan, but I was raised a baseball fan in our household, and that goes back a couple generations. And yeah, so today is the day that they celebrate Jackie Robinson, number 42, from the Brooklyn Dodgers, who broke the color line once and for all. Okay, so Being and Learning is the project, 10-year anniversary, commemorating the writing that I did every day for at least an hour every day for the entire year that started February the 13th through February the 13th, between 2004 and 2005. And ultimately it was published as this book right here, Being and Learning, A Poetic Phenomenology of Education. And we are up to the writing that happened on April the 15th, which is the 61st Poetic Phenomenological Meditation, and it corresponds to pages 97 through 98 of this book, Being and Learning. All right. When we identify the twofold play of being and learning within the first part of the allegory, within the cave, it enables us to account for the mysterious, unnamed source that liberates the prisoner and drags him up the long passage of the cave. The captors in the cave are the teachers, named by Arendt as those who have been charged with the responsibility to preserve the natality and conserve the revolutionary in each child. These captors are not, however, Heidegger's teacher, who lets nothing else be learned but learning. The latter speaks with the saying of the sage, and is a co-learner. The teacher as co-learner who inhabits an unstable ground, seeks the company of others, for co-learning can only be undertaken through the symmetric reciprocation, through the reciprocal exchange of evocative sayings and questions, poetic dialogue. In the cave, in schooling, there is no dialogue. The reciprocation is asymmetric. As we noted above, Arendt is clear in distinguishing education, schooling, from learning, and here we have a better understanding of this distinction. To avoid the unevocative confusion that is issued from sloppy equivocation, we distinguish learning from schooling and identify what Heidegger calls education, paideia, with learning, and identify what Arendt is calling education with the term schooling. In turn, learning only gets underway when the prisoner is unchained and turned around and continues on its way from the ascent, with the ascent from, out of, and finally returning back to the cave. Learning unfolds through the turnings. Schooling, however, is based on the asymmetry of the unilateral instruction of the school teacher, whose charge is to represent the one-sidedness of the present as past, and thereby preserve the capacity of the student, the child, to make the future. Quote, "The function of the school is to teach the children what the world is like and not to instruct them in the art of living." Unquote, from Arendt. Schooling is thus necessary, and it's a preparatory event in the life of the learner, an event that fulfills its duty when and if the revolutionary work of learning is the outcome. That is, the work Arendt describes as, quote, "the task of renewing a common world." The role of the performers in the theater of illusion is to preserve natality, or the capacity to learn, by concealing or sheltering. The truth of concealment organizes schooling around domestic security. Schooling shelters, and in sheltering protects the child from the world and the world from the child. They must be shielded one from the other, because the child as child is incapable of understanding the responsibility that comes from the capacity to make, to initiate, to create with freedom. This longing for others and the desire to create a common world only comes about when the child has been turned away from herself and toward the alterity of others, and thereby attuned to the horizon of beings. But this can only occur after the child has emerged as a self-certain subject. as one who has been located securely within a tradition and who thereby has mastered a mode of communication, a language. It is only after the acquisition of a tradition that one has been secured in the world, and from which one can be lured, a language against which another can appear strange, new, and evocative. The capacity to make new is based on the capacity to recognize the old. But the making of the new is a project of rebuilding the old, or reconstructing the tradition. The destruction of the tradition is thus a reconstruction that comes from the new possibilities emerging in the encounter with other worlds. This new world is thus the ongoing encounter and heretofore disparate worlds whose representatives offer an exchange through evocative sayings and questions. The world is thus, in reality, a dynamic, unfolding, unstatic process. The child, however, must be shielded from the truth of appearance as the one side of the twofold play. She must be presented the illusion of the world as stable and secure, or her capacity to participate in the play of the world's dynamic unfolding will not be retained. The shielding of the child is the truth of concealment. The truth of concealment is depicted in the first part of the allegory, where the bondage is meant to identify the necessary restrainment of the child. The chains hold back and restrain the natality, the child's capacity to initiate and make new. But these chains do not destroy this capacity. Rather, they serve as the force necessary to prepare the way for learning. These chains are the restraint which allows the school teacher to offer the past as present. The shadows are the tradition, or the old world, projected in an illusionary manner as the one and only world. They represent the world as world, and this is why Plato insists that the shadows cast images of beings as they will be encountered in the realm outside of the cave. The performers in the cave and their machinations together represent the truth of concealment as the preservation of possibility, as the profound depth from which the truth of appearance will be wrested. With the truth of concealment, we identify then the essence of schooling as the preservation of natality, the capacity to initiate, create, the preparation of learning, the conservation of freedom. Quote, conservation in this sense of freedom, conservation in the sense of freedom as the capacity to venture out into the clearing of learning. Conservation in the sense of conservation, or conservatism in the sense of conservation, is the essence of the educational activity whose task is always to cherish and protect something. The child against the world against the child, the new against the old against the new. That's where it ends. So, for those of you who might be familiar with Arendt's essay, Christ of Education, what I did in this meditation was essentially rehearse the majority of what she's saying and then clarify points that I've already been making regarding the distinction between education as schooling and education as learning. So Heidegger's notion of education is paideia, and that's what I'm calling learning. And then what Arendt is calling education is what I'm deeming schooling. And then I'm suggesting that, for all of our desires for a schooling that is alternative and progressive and full of is a space of freedom, I'm suggesting provocatively that in fact what the school needs to do, if you follow Arendt, is to ensure that a child's natality is preserved. So they have to be held back. Now, it is a bit of a stretch, you could say, to equate what's going on in the allegory in the cave in the sense of being held in bondage, which in the beginning of this chapter I talked about as, impossible to read without talking about it from a political point of view. But this is the point. This allegory has multiple readings. It gives us multiple opportunities, multiple readings, and one of those is an ability to understand the necessity of sort of early childhood and elementary school education as focused and geared towards preparation for thoughtful, purposeful learning. Right? So it's akin to practice, right? So Here I would just simply refer to someone like John Coltrane, who is one of my heroes, a musician extraordinaire, improvisational genius, jazz musician, but also known to be an extremely disciplined and serious person when it came to practicing. So afterwards, and particularly at a certain part of his career, before he became really, you know, broke open all the boundaries and became train, and he was still with Miles Davis and his group. After gigs, when Miles and the other guys would go out and sort of relax and unwind, Coltrane would go back to his room and practice. He was extremely disciplined. So, the ability to be a masterful improviser, to be truly enacting the offering of freedom that's given to us, we need to shut down for part of the day or part of our time that desire to want to do that, and we need to practice. Which is to say, in my case, for example, take notes, read, think, and get ready for the writing that produces something originary. So I don't think this is, these chains are necessarily ones of oppression. They're ones of restraint. It's also akin to just going to the gym, and doing cardio and lifting weights as a way of preparing for some other activities, such as playing a sport or something like that. So I don't think it's completely out of the extreme. The key then becomes that in the way that one is practicing for performing, the education that is schooling needs again to be purposeful itself, and it needs to be guiding the students towards a development of their capacity, right? So that in the end, that's the point, following Arendt, they're prepared to contribute to the building of a common world. And I think that's it. So as I move forward in this discussion of the truth of concealment, if you want to hear more on that, just back up and listen to some of the meditations of the preceding days, some of the longer ones where I really get into this. But I'm going to leave it here, and I'm going to make this one of the shorter, in terms of time, videos.